Things are escalating in Eastern Europe. Poland is making a big claim. They say their airspace was violated by Belarus. They say 2 attack helicopters crossed over on Tuesday. If true, this is a major escalation. You see, Poland is a member of the NATO alliance. Belarus is Putin's biggest ally. A clash between these 2 countries would be disastrous. So what exactly happened? The first reports emerged early on Tuesday. Polish residents near the border posted suspicious pictures. They claim to have seen choppers with Belarusian symbols. At first, Poland denied this. But around evening, Warsaw made a U-turn. The Defense Ministry admitted that there was indeed a violation. So what changed? Poland says the helicopters were flying low, so the radars found it hard to detect them. But Belarus has another theory. They claim that Poland made a U-turn after getting orders from the West. Basically, that Warsaw is lying. So which side do we believe? If Belarusian President Lukashenko did order this move, it is a brave one. Maybe borderline reckless. He has allowed Russia to use Belarus as a staging ground. He's also hosting Wagner fighters, but he has drawn one red line, and that's joining the war officially. That's something Belarus has not done yet. Belarusian soldiers are still inside their barracks. Would President Lukashenko risk changing that? And that too by attacking a NATO country. Imagine if this alleged helicopter adventure went wrong. Belarus would have been at war with NATO. So logically, it makes no sense whatsoever. Having said that, Poland did warn about this. Their Prime Minister said Wagner fighters could attack from Belarus. Lukashenko, of course, has denied this claim. He says there is no rogue Wagner movement.
I have to teach my units, because an army that does not fight is half an army. You also understand this very well. I don't want to go to war. I don't want our guys to die. Therefore, we need to teach them. So Wagner are transferring their experiences. They give advice and suggest some things.
Well, Lukashenko is not helping his case, and I'll tell you why. Last month, Putin was hosting Lukashenko in St. Petersburg in Russia. Midway through the talks, the Belarusian president decided to joke. He said Wagner fighters are eager to go on a trip to Warsaw. Maybe he thought it was funny, but when the punchline of your joke is all-out war, people may not find it funny. And Putin too made allegations against Poland. He said Warsaw wants to seize Ukrainian land. So put together, you have a very complicated equation. Poland, Belarus and Russia have never been friends. They have unfinished business from the Soviet times, and now there is a new variable in this equation, and that variable is called the Wagner fighters. Around 1,000 of them are based in Belarus. Poland believes they could be used to wage a proxy war. If that happens, what will NATO do? That is the big question. Technically, Wagner is independent from Russia. They're now anti-Putin, remember? So a Wagner attack, can it be seen as a Russian attack? Well, Washington says absolutely.
This group, at the behest of the Russian government, because they do not work independently of the Russian government, is a threat to all of us, and we have to ensure that the message is clear that any attacks by the Wagner group will be seen as an attack by the Russian government.
Now, a couple of things to note here. One, didn't the West cheer Wagner's mutiny? They billed it as some big defeat for Vladimir Putin. But now they're all making a U-turn. They say Wagner and Russia are the same. Second, the stakes are now much higher. Using Wagner was supposed to give Putin plausible deniability. He could have shifted the blame from himself, but Washington is on to him. They're saying Wagner or not, Moscow will take the blame if there is such an attack. So what is the next move? If Tuesday's incursion did happen, we should all be quite worried. Poland is moving around 1,000 soldiers to the border. They're preparing for the worst. And if Poland is attacked, NATO will have to join this war. It's a legal obligation. Remember the Article 5. If one member is attacked, all of them declare war. An attack on one NATO member is an attack on all. On the other side, Belarus too has a backup. Last month, Putin made a public promise to Lukashenko. He said an attack on Belarus would be an attack on Russia. So will things descend to that? Like I said, there is deep mistrust between Belarus and Poland, not just over Ukraine, but many issues. They also have guarantees from bigger powers, Poland from NATO, Belarus from Russia. So could they use this chance to settle personal scores? It's a dangerous prospect. Which is why we need calmer heads to prevail, and the last thing we need is irresponsible jokes and taunts. As it is, the war is escalating and spilling over. The attacks have intensified. Ukraine carried out drone attacks on Moscow. Russia sees this as provocation, its own attacks on Ukrainian cities notwithstanding. So Russia wants to retaliate. Meanwhile, Ukraine is pushing forth with its counteroffensive. They may or may not succeed, but they're going to need more weapons. That's certain. A seemingly uninterrupted supply of weapons, that's what Ukraine needs. Its key source are partners in Central Europe, but they've hit a roadblock. They don't have enough workers for their weapons factories. Here's a report.
Over 500 days into the conflict, Ukraine and its Western backers are confronting a new challenge. No, it's not the weapon supplies. Manufacturers are ready to meet Kyiv's requirements. What they are struggling with is talent. The workers needed to make the weapons are in short supply. A recruitment drive is underway in Central Europe. It's one of the key hubs where war supplies for Ukraine are built. Since the war began in 2022, factories in Poland and the Czech Republic have been churning out guns, shells and more. The output has already matched the size and scale of the Berlin War era. But the manufacturers think they can do better. They want to ramp up production, but they don't have enough workers. So the arms industry is rolling out lucrative incentives. A manufacturer in the Czech Republic has offered company-financed apartments for new hires and even free food in canteens. A Polish company has taken to social media. They are pushing ads on internet platforms to attract interest, but still, finding the right fit is a challenge. The reason is the tight labor market. Europe has one of the largest aging populations in the world. The weapons industry needs younger workers with technical skills. They are becoming harder to find. So, some manufacturers are turning towards alternatives. They are joining hands with local universities and exploring technologies like automation to expand. There is an urgency to ramp up production. The weapon suppliers are responding to demand. Central Europe is an important pipeline for Ukraine. Last year, 29 nations supplied major weapons to Kyiv. Out of the 29, 2 countries stood out: Poland and the Czech Republic. They sent more than 20% of Ukraine's arms needs. From tanks to armored vehicles, howitzers, air defense systems, helicopters, ammunition and rockets, Central Europe supplied all of this. And they intend to keep going, because the demand is showing no signs of slowing. Russia invaded Ukraine over a year back, and no side still has a decisive edge. The forces on both sides are fighting for every inch of territory, and they're leaving no stone unturned to gain the upper hand. Recently, Ukraine launched a counteroffensive. The goal was to push back the Russian forces and reclaim some of the lost territory. Progress has been slow, but Kyiv is pouring everything into the offensive, from heavy arms to even toy drones. Ukrainian forces have repurposed them for military use. On the front lines in Zaporizhia, a gamer-turned-soldier recently put a new gadget to the test. This drone might be small, but it packs a punch. It is flown straight into the target to inflict maximum damage.
Since I've been transferred to this unit to work with drones, every time I put on my goggles and take the joystick, I recall my mother telling me that those video games would not do me any good. Well, if this isn't useful, then what is?
The war in Ukraine is a frozen conflict, with no signs of simmering violence or bloodshed. So, as long as that's the case, the demand for weapons will thrive.
Brace yourself for this next story, because Pakistan is talking about peace. It's one of the most absurd stories of the week. Maybe a tie with this human/bear in China. Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif wants talks with India. Listen to this first.
we are prepared to talk to them, provided that the neighbor is serious to talk serious matters on the table. Because war is no more an option, that our neighbor has to understand that we cannot become normal neighbors unless abnormalities are removed, unless our serious issues are understood and addressed to through peaceful and meaningful discussions.
Classic Pakistan. Talk about war and peace in the same sentence. Just one advice for Shehbaz Sharif though. Next time, maybe mention who you're talking about. It's India, not neighbor. Now, there are two things which stand out in Shehbaz Sharif's statement. One, he's accusing India of not being serious. You heard his words. We are willing to talk provided the neighbor is serious. That's what he said. And two, he talks about abnormalities. Shehbaz Sharif says abnormalities must be removed if relations are to be normal. Good wordplay, but beyond that, what are these abnormalities? That Shehbaz Sharif did not specify. For India, it's always been terrorism. India has insisted that terror and talks cannot go hand in hand. We'll have to wait and see the response this time. But Shehbaz Sharif's comments were not isolated. Elsewhere, his Minister of State for Foreign Affairs was also talking about India. Her name is Hina Rabbani Khar, and her tone was quite different. Listen to this.
Then there is the East, okay, which is the darling of the West, but really has decided to be the darling of the West while at the same time being very, very belligerent within the East. So India, stands out as a country which is very, very open towards certain countries, but very, very closed-minded towards some of its own people and towards certain countries within the region.
Hina Rabbani Khar says India is trying to be the darling of the West. Maybe that's why India is the top buyer of Russian oil. Or why India criticizes Western comments on internal issues, or why India attends the SCO and BRICS summits. Plus, it's a bit rich coming from Pakistan. This is a country that spent most of the Cold War years doing America's dirty work. So less of a darling, more of a minion. Anyway, let's focus on what they're trying to do here. The Pakistani leaders. Sharif, at least on paper, is the Prime Minister of Pakistan. Any initiative aimed at peace is welcome, especially coming from Islamabad. But when Pakistan talks about peace, you must ask three questions. A, why now? B, do their actions match it? And C, does the army support it? The timing is indeed strange. Shehbaz Sharif is an outgoing Prime Minister. Why would he make a peace appeal to India? Normally, it is done to appease international lenders and Western countries. When Pakistan needs a bailout, they talk sweet. They pretend to be the nice guys. So could this be a similar attempt? The International Monetary Fund has released one payment for Pakistan, but reports say they're going to need more. Comments about peace and talks are usually green lights for lenders. They signal positivity. And there is precedent for Pakistan doing this. On the 17th of January this year, Shehbaz Sharif made a similar appeal. He offered talks with India. And guess what happened after 2 weeks? Pakistan held the first round of their talks with the IMF. So that's definitely a possibility. Now to the second question. What is Pakistan doing for this peace that they want? Well, pretty much nothing. Reports say border infiltrations are still happening. So is smuggling of narcotics. You see, there's a big difference between talking peace and working for peace. Pakistan only does the first. They talk. Finally, question number 3. Does the army approve of Shehbaz Sharif's statements? I would think so, because the army chief, Asim Munir, was present at the same event. Those comments by Shehbaz Sharif were made in his presence, the army chief's presence. Plus, the current government is supposed to be supported by the army. So I'm guessing they do agree. If you keep all the history aside, if you look at the pure logic of this appeal, it makes perfect sense. Pakistan desperately needs India's friendship. Their inflation is still at 28%. Their external debt is still unpaid. Around 8 million Pakistanis are likely to experience acute food shortage this season. And to top it all, the security situation is bad. Just this week, there was a suicide attack at a political rally. Around 56 people died. So on paper, Pakistan needs normal relations with India, very much. The so-called darling of the West could really help them out. Just look at Sri Lanka. India lobbied for Colombo at the IMF. Lenders from Japan and France are now lining up to help. Pakistan could have used that help from India, but unfortunately, you can't keep the history aside. In Pakistan, decisions are taken in the army's interest, not the people. So unless you see concrete actions to back up peace offers, you can never be sure. Nonetheless, this is an offer, and we'll have to wait and see how India responds. Now to the big story from India. Violence and rioting have gripped the state of Haryana. Religious sites have been vandalized, shops have been torched and looted. At least 6 people have been killed. The pictures are truly worrying. Some of the roads look like war zones with charred vehicles all around. The violence erupted in Nuh. It is a village in southern Haryana. It is also close to one of India's biggest business hubs, Gurugram. The violence has spread there too. But what triggered it? On Monday morning, a Hindu rally was passing through Nuh. Thousands of people were part of it. Some slogans were raised which triggered a standoff. The rally was allegedly attacked with stones. After this, things spiraled out of control. It became all-out religious violence. A mosque was set on fire in Gurugram. The cleric was stabbed to death. In total, at least 6 people have died. More than 70 others have been injured. Dozens of vehicles and shops have also been gutted. What is the government of Haryana doing about this? Around 116 people have been arrested, 90 others have been detained. The Chief Minister says those guilty will be punished. He's also asking for more central help. 20 companies of central forces are already deployed in the state of Haryana. The Chief Minister wants 4 more. Internet has been shut down in parts of southern Haryana, plus there is a curfew. You've probably heard dozens of debates on this story. Maybe seen multiple reports on how the violence unfolded, so we're not talking about that. We are talking about the bigger picture. Gurugram is often pitched as a cyber city, a hub of all things technology. Yet that very same place doesn't have internet right now. What sort of message does that send? And I'm not saying the shutdown is not justified. I'm saying things should never have reached this stage. We talk about making Gurugram a global city, a top destination for big companies. But put yourself in the shoes of a foreign investor or a CEO at a multinational company. Would you be confident about setting up shop here? Amid these pictures of charred vehicles and riot cops. Exactly my point. Gurugram has become a success story in recent years. It is home to thousands of production houses. Some of the biggest MNCs have offices there, like Nestle or Coca-Cola or Maruti Suzuki. But today, many of them are spooked. Companies have asked employees to work from home. You can't become the next Hong Kong or Singapore with such headlines. And I'm not just talking about the violence. Look at other indicators. Crimes against women were up 57% last year. Snatching cases up 27%. 1 person dies every day from road accidents in the city. Gurugram even has a gang problem. In the last 2 decades, around 15 top gangsters have been killed in violence. This year, a man was shot 13 times. These are not good numbers. They don't encourage locals, let alone foreign companies. The question is, what is the root cause? Does the state government not have enough resources? It's hard to believe that. Haryana is ruled by the BJP, the same party in the state and the centre, so there is no scope of federal roadblocks. Consider what happened this week. Haryana got 20 companies of central forces within 24 hours. So resources are very much available. But somehow they're not being used well. We saw a similar situation in Manipur. Same party ruling at the state and centre, yet no end to the violence. But both these issues are linked to law and order. It's the bread and butter of all governments, but clearly not in Haryana. From start to end, this is law and order failure. How were inciting slogans raised at a rally? How was the crowd allowed to pelt stones? How was the mob allowed to go on a rampage? The answer to all of these questions is the same, because law and order failed. So what needs to be done? Well, the situation is slowly returning to normal. Hopefully, the violence will end soon. But the state government's job does not end here. As citizens, we have some expectations from them. Going to office without being attacked, walking on the roads without being stone pelted, running our businesses without mobs at the door. Is that really too much to ask? If Gurugram wants to be a futuristic city, it must get the basics right. Meanwhile, a new era has already begun in Canada. Well, for Canadian smokers anyway, the country's stringent new cigarette regulations have come into force. How stringent? Well, this is the nation that pioneered graphic images on cigarette packages. So it really had to go the extra mile to tighten the screws further, and it has. The countdown has begun in Canada for warnings on every individual cigarette. That's right, every Canadian cigarette will soon have a warning printed on it. It's one of the many measures they're introducing to discourage people from smoking. Here's our report.
Smokers of the world, lend us your ears, for your eyes are about to get beset by a new type of warning. Canada is at it again. The country has come up with a new way to drill home old warnings. You already know that smoking is bad, but now Canada will remind you with every cigarette you pull out of your pack. Because you see, a law has come into effect. And in a few years, it'll reflect on each and every Canadian cigarette. The first smoke from your new cigarette pack may say, cigarettes damage your organs. The next could be different, marginally. It could say, cigarettes cause cancer. Or that cigarettes cause leukemia. You know, for those of you who like a more scientific warning. It may say, tobacco smoke harms children. Or for those of you without little ones of your own, cigarettes cause impotence. And in a poetic way to round off your chain-smoking journey, the last warning could be poison in every puff. You see, Canada really has brought about a new law to enable all this. It's called Tobacco Products Appearance, Packaging and Labelling Regulations, and it came into force yesterday. What the law aims to do is simple: encourage people to quit smoking, using every opportunity to hammer it into them that cigarettes are harmful. Canada has always been on the forefront of the war against tobacco. In 2001, it was the first country to mandate pictorial warnings on cigarette packs. This new law is an extension of that. Maybe you have found a way to ignore those blood-curdling images. Or if you're in a country like India, maybe you just buy loose cigarettes, never having to look at the graphic warnings at all. Well, Canada has now found a new way to get its message across nonetheless. Each and every cigarette will be printed with a warning, the kind we told you about earlier. So every smoke break will also be a reminder of the harm cigarettes do. And remember, after Canada pioneered the graphic package warning, the idea spread. So don't be surprised if you start getting warning-laced cigarettes in your country soon as well. Now, the cautionary cigarettes aren't the only change Canada's new law brings. It's updating the packaging too. It'll keep changing the image on the packages regularly, because research shows that after a while, people tune things out, even terrifying images of cancer. So, Canada will ensure the pictures keep changing before you can learn to ignore them. Also, the warning pictures will cover 75% of a cigarette box in the future. Canada's standardizing the warning size, in case cigarette manufacturers try and find loopholes. And speaking of loopholes, this won't just apply to cigarette packs. All Canadian tobacco products will soon bear the warning signs. But the new law will take time to be implemented. Canada is taking a staggered approach. There are different deadlines for different tobacco products to adopt these new standards. But come April 2025, every Canadian cigarette or cigar will have to conform to these rules. So Canada is taking the fight against tobacco seriously, as it should. Tobacco is a harmful and addictive substance. It causes millions of deaths and costs billions in public healthcare funding. Over the years, Canadian governments have successfully reduced the amount of smokers in Canada, from about half of the population in 1965 to just about 13% today. That's a massive reduction, and it takes dedication to achieve that kind of progress. Dedication and perhaps innovative steps, like the new individual cigarette warnings. But will the remaining smokers heed the warnings on each of their poison sticks? Or will they just get blown away in a puff of smoke?
And finally, it's time for Vantage shots, images that tell the story, starting with Jerusalem. The August full moon, also called the supermoon, rose above the old city. It was the first of the two supermoons to be witnessed this month. In Sri Lanka, an uninvited guest appeared during a Lanka Premier League match. Players were as shocked as the spectators. We'll introduce you to the guest. Meanwhile, in China, the video of a bear is doing the rounds. It shows the bear standing on its hind legs inside a zoo enclosure. The video has sparked a debate. Is it really a bear or a man in a bear costume? That's the burning question in China right now. And finally, we are taking you back in history. On this day in 1990, Iraq invaded its small but oil-rich neighbor Kuwait. It took only a few hours to capture Kuwait City. The Emir of Kuwait fled to Saudi Arabia. Iraq not only gained control of 20% of the world's oil reserves, but also a substantial coastline on the Persian Gulf. We're leaving you with that. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow from Gandhinagar.
One thing that cricket field, I think we've got to wait for him to just exit. I don't know.
Looks like massive unknown. Who's the fourth umpire? He's a brave guy. Looks like it's. That must be a first. This type of a hold-up.
This is serious business here.
Nervous now. Which kid bag?